Hello, everyone. Welcome to another post. I will be talking once again about Brené's work on shame and worthiness between men and women. This is a response to one of her comments where she talked about women are the holders of men's shame. The story was that she was at a book signing and there was a gentleman there who said that as he was handing her books to sign, he asked her, "Why don't you write about men's shame?" And at the time, she said, "Well, I do not know as much about men and men's issues. I'm a woman, so I write mostly about women and their shame." And he said, "Do you see these three books? They're for my wife and my two daughters. But I would like you to know that they would happily see me die on my white horse than have me fall from it." And that statement struck her because she realized that he could not be vulnerable with the people that he is closest to. And at the time, I remember my initial reaction to it. I said, of course. Of course, women freak out when men are in shame because women are terrified. Men attack us when they're in shame situations. I had two main things that I wanted to talk about. The first is the vulnerability insecurity issue, where many times we mistake vulnerability for insecurity. In a patriarchal society, men being insecure was the harbinger of pain and additional responsibility, depending on how he responded. So when you see a vulnerable guy, you assume that he's insecure and this is going to stay with you. Now, if you remember, Brené Brown mentioned that if anyone is in a shame spiral, which is an insecurity and sometimes a vulnerability, that they are very dangerous to their dependents or to people who they're in authority over or to people who they have considerable control over. I mean, think about our greatest shame stories, and many times you will realize that that was either a parent, a teacher, a coach, somebody with considerable authority or control over you. And I always use the stereotype of the man that was shamed at work, maybe by his boss. And so he comes home in a funk and he takes it out on his kids and he takes it out on his wife. That's the classic story of shame begetting shame, like moving the shame over. Now, Brene Brown talks about three unhealthy ways that when people have been shamed, they tend to react. They either shrink back, they people please, or they attack. Shrink is when you disappear, where you cannot stand the feeling of what has happened. You cannot come to terms with the emotion that goes along with it. So you disappear. And for many women, this means that the male's responsibility has disappeared. And in a patriarchal society, that means that the women have just lost their income and many times their protection. Now, of course, in those societies, there were some ways that women could obtain power, but that was very limited. You couldn't do much. So if 70% of your income and protection absconds, that is a serious, serious problem. The second option is for you to people please. And that is when you feel that you have lost your standing. So you try to regain the standing. Now, with men in a shame spiral, you have to ask yourself, who did they lose their standing with? With women or with men? Many times it was with other men. So they had to signal that they conform to masculinity in order to regain their standing. Now, the classic sign of masculinity, according to Brene Brown, are four things: control of emotions, work above everything else, control of people, especially women, and violence. Now, with the control of emotions, which is like being more stoic, sometimes that might be an advantage because then it counteracts you shrinking back by you not losing responsibility and just being able to weather things. But real health is by expressing and dealing with your emotions and not stuffing it down. Then the second part is work overall, where that also can help because you might regain income by working harder, But at the same time, you lose connection to your loved ones because of overwork. So depending on how they take that, that also can be, it's a mixed bag. The really scary one is the third one, where you're having control over women, where to look like a man, you have to have your house in order. And that starts getting tyrannical really quickly. It's very frightening for women when someone decides that they want to have absolute control over you, or, treat you in that kind of way. The last one is absolutely frightening, which is the violence. And if that is to the boss, well, you just lost your income. Maybe he might go to prison, he might get killed. And if it's to the family, then that's an abuse situation. And the violence is not only physical, but it could be emotional violence. It could be financial violence, any kind of violence. So that's a problem. And I always bring up this old adage where we talk about men being afraid that women will make fun of them, but women being afraid that men will kill them. It's a quote that women use all the time because this is the reality we live with most of the time. And so when you see a man in a shame spiral, the real question you're asking is he going to hurt me? And this is why many times women cannot stand or hold space for men in insecurity or in vulnerable positions. Now, going back into the responsibility part, the stories that I have are from people who are of lower income, where if one partner disintegrates, you're really in a big pickle because you really needed both people to bring their full game. So even if men are unemployed, they will not contribute to the household because it's not really considered manly. So all of a sudden you have an extra responsibility. You pretty much have another child. And it's kind of like that saying where they say drowning men drown people. I always remember the story of a lifeguard way back in the old country, where when they were training him, they told him that you need to bonk a drowning person over the head before you try and rescue them, because if not, they will, in their panic, wrap their arms around you and drown the two of you. So if you are not a quote unquote strong swimmer, you have a really great chance of drowning because of somebody who has shrunk and who is, if they shrink during their insecurity or vulnerability spiral. The second problem with that is if you do step up and bring more effort to maintaining the family while they're shrinking, there's a chance of them resenting you for your success, resenting you for mothering them, resenting you for being the more responsible one, quote unquote. And I remember this story from college, and it has stayed with me for so long because I'm a romantic. And I remember this girl in church who had just graduated. She got a really nice banking job, and she, straight shot to middle class. And she was dating this guy who had an associate's 2-year degree. And her mom was absolutely against her marrying this guy. And here was her story. She said, I've seen this over and over again. You have a 4-year degree. He has a 2-year degree. His degree may limit him in the financial opportunities that he will have. And then one day, it might be next year, it might be 10 years from now, there will be a financial decision that needs to be made. And both of you will disagree. You will have different opinions. But because you are educated, your opinion will probably make more sense and will prevail. And that will trigger his insecurity about the idea that you are more educated than him and therefore you are in a higher class than him. And he will resent you and he will call you proud. And remember, I have to mention this proud thing because Brene Brown says for women, the very first thing that women cannot be to conform to femininity is not be proud. They must be humble and they must be nice. So that's why men calling women proud is a big deal. They're literally saying that you have transgressed the first facet of being feminine. So the mother says, he will call you names. And then the violence will begin. And she said she had seen it over and over and over again. And the interesting thing was this girl did not marry that guy. She broke up with him for that very reason. The second part is more of a personal story for me. And I was caretaking in a relationship I was in, a long-term relationship that I was in. So whenever anything happened to my partner at work or any difficulties he was having, I was what I thought was supportive and, oh no, they don't deserve you at work. And oh, that person is being too difficult, and trying to be on his side. But I could not lose any amount of respect for him in any way, his ability or his person, which I felt that was appropriate. Yes, just because someone's having a bad day or a bad time, you should not lose respect for them. However, I felt in that relationship that to get respect, I needed to be perfect. I needed to keep the house good. I needed to keep work good. I needed to never sweat. Everything needed to be under control. And if I ever had a bad day or was difficult or vulnerable in any way, that respect was gone. And then the comments about, oh, you're so fragile and oh, poor baby started coming out. So I had a situation where I was at the time at work. I had a real estate deal, a large real estate deal where I had investors and we had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I missed a clause that would have caused us to lose the deal and lose a lot of money. And the minute I found the clause, I kept it together at work, but I came home, I cried, I lost sleep for about a week. I scoured the documents, I scoured contracts to make sure I could fix this. Eventually, the deal did go through and we did make some decent amount of profit. But I always remember that the response from my partner at the time was, yeah, I knew corporate was too hard for you. This is how I know you can't handle tough situations. So in a sense, I was shamed for being human. And so over time, what happened was that I also started begetting shame. So every time he had a tough time, I started feeling like that's not fair. If I can't have vulnerability, then you can't have vulnerability. And so I started re-shaming him based on my shame trigger. If it was pretty much, hey, if I have to do it, you have to do it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so, of course, I hope you can see the amount of dysfunction and unhealth that was in that relationship already. But that's also another dynamic that happens where shame begets shame begets shame. And it's just this spiral of somebody was shamed, therefore they will shame another person. Now, Brene Brown does not talk about solutions for this. Really, she goes into dealing with your own shame, which I think is the best thing you can do to be present for yourself and to be present for another partner. Is you have to become, quote unquote, a strong swimmer. Then, if you do have a partner having a vulnerability cycle, you can, with empathy, have space to let that person handle their own shame without you absorbing it, taking it personally, or without you shaming them or trying to fix them. Let them deal with it. And I think also you do have to have a little bit of faith. You believe that no one really has it out for you. It's just everyone is trying to survive in the best way they know how. And many times it's nice to try to survive on this green earth with a friend. So trying to have faith in the person that they are growing, and this moment will pass and more moments like this will pass and they will grow better would be helpful. And if they're not, if you realize that they are in a state of unhealth that is not good for you, then without shame, but in a loving response, detach and find a safer place and a safer space and partner that you can continue on your healing journey with. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has given you guys ideas on dealing with your own shame and observing maybe some dynamics in your relationships. I'm glad you listened. Thank you for taking time to listen to this really long podcast. And see you on the next one. Have a great and healthy day.